Good morning, everybody. I have Senator Black with us. He's back again this week. I know he wasn't here last week, but it's good to have you back, Senator. I know today
Thank
we
you.
have a lot to touch upon on the Ukraine and Russia conflict, how the West in America plays into that, and some of the hyperbolic statements of our officials and NATO officials that continue to deflect from diplomacy and more into this, arms race and proliferation towards nuclear war. So I wanted to pass it on to you, and we can get started on the topic of the day, which is a nuclear surprise attack on Russia would be suicidal.
Well, thank you, Morgan. Let me start by saying that there is breaking news that really hasn't quite broken into the mainstream media yet, but there is an enormous battle taking place at a city called Pokrovsk. It is an intersection of railway lines and highway lines, and it's very, very vital. It has one of the largest coal mines in Europe, but the key is that it's sort of the linchpin to the defense of the entire area on the front in Donetsk, the big, like the state of Ukraine, now the state of Russia, Donetsk. And this is the one that is the most critical in the war. And so we've got this situation. This battle has raged for over a year for Pokrovsk, very, very costly to the Russians and very, very costly to the Ukrainians. But they just realized that this place is so essential that Ukraine can't afford to lose it. So they've been willing to just throw enormous numbers of soldiers into the battle and to die. And apparently, even though I'm sure the Russians have taken great numbers of casualties, as time goes on, whenever they do these exchanges of deceased soldiers killed on the battlefield, the numbers have become more and more lopsided to where very large numbers of Ukrainian dead are returned to Ukraine, and very small numbers of Russian dead are returned the other way. I think the last time the race, it was like 1,000 Ukrainian dead were sent home, 31 Russian dead were sent home. So it's apparent that the death toll is very lopsided at this point, and that does not fare well for Ukraine. And I think it shows the fact that the Ukrainian defensive lines are buckling on all fronts. It's a little unclear when you talk about troops being surrounded. Sometimes even the country involved doesn't know for sure what the situation of its own troops are, let alone the other side. But it looks like there are large numbers of Ukrainian soldiers who could end up being trapped in Pokrovsk and another very large city that adjoins it called Mirnograd. And this could amount to some thousands of people, perhaps 5,000. There is another battle raging that Ukraine has lost also. This is the battle for Kupiansk, not as big as the battle for Pokrovsk by any means, but somehow the Ukrainians have sort of tripped up, and they've managed to leave a large military contingent trapped inside the city, where the Russians clearly have control all around them. that may be another 5,000 troops who are trapped there. So all of this, the battle lines are collapsing at this point in Ukraine, and in the course of this, now there was an emergency flight made at the approval of Zelensky. They sent one Black Hawk helicopter. What they expected to do with this, I don't know, one helicopter that flew 11 special forces troops, Ukrainian troops, sent them into this trapped area of Pokrovsk, and they announced on, I think, on Ukrainian television that the special forces were going on. It was only one helicopter of 11 men, and I saw that just an hour ago, the Russian High Command announced that all 11 had been killed. I find pretty credible, because you drop a tiny force like that into a mammoth battle, and their survivability is minimal. And our prayers, my prayers go with the very courageous men who went in there. My guess is they were there to try to rescue some of the Ukrainian high command, or perhaps some very powerful political leaders from this area. But whatever their mission was, it's failed. They were all killed. And Pokrovsk is just in a nightmarish situation. And the Ukrainian troops are they're just cornered. They have nowhere to go. So in this is sort of by way of very current background, but I noticed that also, there's been this great debate over the Tomahawk missiles, long-range American cruise missiles that can fire deeply into Russia for the purpose of destroying critical facilities, especially oil. And there still are people in the Pentagon and elsewhere who believe that Russia is nothing but a gas station with an army. That's what they described it as years ago. And it is an enormous oil and natural gas producer, but it also is the world's greatest producer of fertilizer, greatest exporter of wheat, the greatest exporter of lumber. The list goes on and on. Aluminum, steel, just enormous things come out of there. So what we have, here, this latest thing about Tomahawk missiles is this idea of deep strikes into the Russian heartland. And now let me back up. At the very beginning of the Ukraine war, the part that we think about starting not in 2014 when we overthrew the government of Ukraine, the U.S. did.
Not the real kind of the historical, but right. The one when we all kind of paid attention.
That's right. When we started to pay attention, when Russia came across the border, at the very early, President Putin recognized that this whole war had been orchestrated by NATO and by the United States, which is part of NATO. And his concern was a miscalculation on the part of the West, that we would very quickly come to realize that the only way that we could do anything would be with a nuclear strike, kind of a nuclear Pearl Harbor. And so from the very beginning, he emphasized the nuclear power of Russia. And now, this was not him threatening anyone with nuclear weapons. This was a way of transmitting to the foreign policy elite and also somewhat to the populace of the Western countries that, hey, if you're tempted to say, well, let's pull out the nuclear joker from the deck, just understand that, two can play this game. And so, today we focus on the power of particularly of Russia in the nuclear arena, just as a reminder that anyone who is tempted to think, well, we could pull our chestnuts out of the fire if we just suddenly, without warning, perhaps arm these Tomahawk missiles with nuclear warheads and fire them into Russia under the cover that we're just sending them there, as one more weapon for the Ukrainians. Just in case, I think it's important to do a little bit of a review of what has been happening in the nuclear arena with Russia, because they have nuclear programs that include 6 of what experts call super weapons, super nuclear weapons, that really are they're technologically advanced beyond what the U.S. and NATO have in many respects. So the most recent thing is the Borovesnik missile. We've been talking about how you pronounce this. I think.
Oh yeah, it's been tripping me up, but
Borovesnik, and Russia has just had a successful test of this. It's a nuclear cruise missile. In other words, it has a nuclear warhead, but what makes it unique in all the world is that it has a nuclear powered engine so that it can fly indefinitely on nuclear power. And so they did a test. The test, it flew for 15 hours. Now, that it wasn't that it couldn't fly longer. It's just that I guess the
test was done. Yeah,
the test managers got tired; they had to go to bed or something. But it went 8,700 miles. But that's not to say that that's its range. Its range apparently is just is limitless. And General Valery Gerasimov, who's the head of their armed forces, said that it has clearly demonstrated the ability to evade military defenses. It has some of the same technology that the Tomahawk has, but it's much more so.
Yeah. Now, Senator, I did add a video on the cruise missile. Maybe we can watch that and then we can continue.
Let's take a look at that.
According to Russian President Vladimir Putin, the missile can evade any defense system. It reportedly flew 14,000 kilometers for about 15 hours when it was tested earlier in the week. In remarks released by the Kremlin on Sunday, Putin called the missile a, quote, unique weapon with near unlimited range and confirmed plans to move toward deployment. Moscow says the test shows its nuclear deterrent is at its highest level.
The system is intended to defeat a missile defense. And so the idea is because it can fly for basically an unlimited range, then it can fly around defenses. On the other hand, you could build more defenses or you could use aircraft to go intercept them. So I don't think the system is invincible, but it's part of the deepening arms race that we're in, where they've come up with a new system and now we have to come up with something to shoot it down. We're seeing countries use nuclear threats more and more to get their way in the world. And so while I think a lot of these programs have existed for years, if not decades, the reason Putin is doing this on live TV while wearing fatigues is because he wants to send a certain message. So it's true that only Russia has been crazy enough to actually build one of these things, but it doesn't mean that Russia is the only country that could build such a thing. It's just other countries, I think, have thought better of it.
Now, what really irks me in that broadcast is this kind of this pivot to, instead of saying let's develop treaties, they're saying let's develop a weapon to take this thing out. It's just this bottomless escalation of just trying to create the next best weapon to own your enemy, as opposed to saying, well, this is very serious. Maybe we can make a treaty to stop these weapons from existing. So it's always so interesting how that what's put on the pedestal for everyone to kind of absorb.
What did you think of his remark that only Russia has been crazy enough to produce this weapon?
Oh yeah, and that's also it's infuriating because I think what we'll get into is some of the remarks from the Western leaders, even our senators that have said stuff that are so extreme that when they say these terms, I know you'll probably get into some of them. I think Senator Wicker said something, the most egregious kind of thing, that it shows that we're not coming to the table in good faith, that we're kind of these actors that are crazy, that we kind of subscribe to a person like Putin, or our enemies. Now we have like Maduro. But if you listen to our statements, how could we expect them to come to the table in good faith, in a sense?
I thought the idea that only they are crazy enough to do this. I don't want to. Here's the thing: we've got great nations that recognize that we have this nuclear genie out of the bottle, and that if either side gets too advanced to where they genuinely could threaten our ability to use nuclear weapons against them, then it's just you're forced to compete and to move forward. And so there's nothing crazy about it. It's not crazy when we try to improve our nuclear technology, unless there was a time, particularly under Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan did enormous work to come up with nuclear agreements that really dampened the nuclear arms race, saved trillions of dollars for both the old Soviet Union, which is gone now. I have to remind everybody, Russia is not the Soviet Union, but Ronald Reagan put a lot of work, a lot of political capital into dampening the arms race, and just gradually, I couldn't tell you precisely when it started, but we changed our whole outlook on the world under George Bush, where we started saying, well, let's attack 7 countries and overthrow them in the next 5 years. And so we went after Iraq, we took them down, and Afghanistan, and we tried to do it with Syria. It took us 13 years of utter horrific bloodshed, rape and murder and everything before they finally fell. We took down Libya, and the list goes on and on. And so there was this change in attitude, and certainly it began under Bush. At least it was ramped up, but it continued. This idea that there was some obnoxious member of the White House staff, I think, who once said, every 10 years we need to take out some some such and such country, such and such being a very foul-mouthed, demeaning way of looking. Some little country, just obliterate them just to show our power. That's what he was saying. I don't want to use his terms because they were so crude and disgusting. But we sort of came up with this idea, and this was in the unipolar world where you feel like we could do anything because we have the power. And what's happening is the power is shifting. There is an evolving multi-power world. China is extremely powerful. It's the biggest factory producer on earth. Russia is a formidable military power. But Russia has the means of producing new weapons to address whatever threat they face. They've developed ways of doing this that are far beyond anything that we have in this country, far beyond anything that the Chinese have. The accumulation of engineering talent and managerial talent in their arms production is something that we need to study. The United States, and I'm very pro-American. I want us to be strong and stable. I just don't want us to be mucking around all over the world and bankrupting ourselves.
Yeah, I like that distinction, because I think sometimes people in this, I guess, for lack of a better term, pro-peace movement, anti-interventionalists, a lot of it is sometimes taken to this extreme, or perceived to be taken to this extreme, like, oh, these hippies, they don't even want a military. When no, you do need these certain things. That's what kind of solidifies your borders as a country. But the way that some of our policy members and leaders have been conducting themselves to engage in these constant wars does not serve in the purpose for Americans, and our longevity and our prosperity.
Yeah, and that's the point. Even if you look at it in just a cold-hearted Machiavellian way, where you just say, okay, all that matters is our power and our wealth and so forth, you can't even justify it on that grounds, because we're not strengthening America. We're not increasing our wealth through these wars. We're really, we just keep racking up debt to the point where I teach American government to senior high school students right now, homeschool students, the American debt. I was just looking at debt figures. A quarter of the entire federal budget is pure debt. It's not supported by any income of any sort. Now, that if you did that with your household budget, if I did it with my household budget, it would just be a matter of a few years before we're in bankruptcy court, because the whole thing would come unglued. And we know that at some point the whole thing will come unglued for the U.S., just like it did for France. France, during the Revolutionary War, France gets very little credit in American history, but it's doubtful that we would have, that the colonies would have broken away from Great Britain without massive military support from the French, including the key battle at Yorktown, where the British were finally defeated. Well, the British were finally defeated because an enormous French fleet showed up and controlled the seas and blocked the British from moving supplies and reinforcements or evacuating people. and they were just cornered. But they weren't just cornered because of the colonists. They were cornered by this superpower, France, that sent the fleet, blocked it, and but while France had an enormous geopolitical victory by breaking the colonies away from Great Britain, so the king lost his 13 colonies permanently, and they formed the United States. At the same time, France, even though it was a great military victory for them, it was not too long before the whole system collapsed under a mountain of debt, and the King of France was beheaded along with all kinds of other people. So, and this happens. It's not the only time. France is not the only time. You can spend your way into oblivion. And I worry about your generation, Morgan.
Yeah, it's definitely on my mind. I'm sure that you teach in the class to the high schoolers. I'm sure they're freaked out. But to pivot back to this topic, you're right. I think that what we are seeing is this this kind of irrational escalation, because the leaders in the room are also recognizing this. They're recognizing this debt. They're recognizing that this financial system can only continue if we can continue to have this hegemony. And so if we concede or roll back, a little bit, then this system might implode on itself, and we actually might feel the amount of debt that we've accrued. So I think that is kind of why we see this hubris and this just never-ending escalation on our leaders' part, is because they partly recognize kind of the game they've been playing, that it is running out. It's only a matter of time. Nothing can last forever, essentially, and I think that's kind of why you see this. Our backing of Israel, even though we've seen just these human rights abuses beyond measure. This talking about now engaging with Venezuela, which Venezuela is a strategic partner with Russia and China. So you have these continued characters on the scene of America versus China and Russia. And so I think that that's very important to note, and important to note that our financial system is a lot, I think, mainly dictates these continued wars. We'd like to kind of exploit human rights abuses to get the public on board, but there's always this, you've got to broaden the scope and kind of see what's happening behind the scenes, and a lot of the times it's a lot of financial reasons that these wars are engaged in.
Money propels wars in many respects. And from the very beginning, the bankers in London and the bankers in New York recognized that here they had enormous Russian deposits in the bank. So it's really the Russian national treasury that trusted the West enough to deposit. I think it may have been like $1/3 trillion that were on deposit, and we seized them immediately because it's money, and we could take it, and so we did. And then the banks in London and the banks in New York worked together, and they have issued bonds. They said, well, okay, we can't just outright steal it. That would look too bad. So what we'll do is we'll impound it permanently, and we'll draw interest. A big part of $1 trillion is a lot of interest. And what we'll do, we'll multiply that by issuing bonds. So we'll take $500 billion and we'll turn it into $50 trillion, and we'll issue these long-term bonds. So the bankers are very much behind this war. Then you also had the hedge funds. BlackRock was very active there, and other groups. And they got the Ukrainians to pass legislation. This is under President Zelensky, and they made it possible to sell off state-owned enterprises of Ukraine to foreign interests for a nickel on the dollar. Because who in Ukraine has the money to buy this stuff? Everybody is broke in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And so in come the outside speculators and say, okay, we can take this. And of course, that gave this tremendous incentive to keep shoveling fire into the war furnace. And nobody in the West, nobody gives a rip about the Ukrainian man and woman and child. They don't care. Those people, if they all got under a big steamroller and just got squished on the road, nobody would care in the West. It is all about what can we do, what power can we get, and it's tragic because the Ukrainians, they're very wonderful people, and so anyway, how about if I go through a little bit more of the disclosure of the Russian weapons?
Yes. Yeah.
So just back to the Borovesnik cruise missile. It's a miniature nuclear reactor. Some of the West have called it a potential for a nuclear disaster, a flying Chernobyl. Well, all of our missiles, all of our nuclear missiles are potential Chernobyls. So we don't know the exact yield of the warheads that the Borovesniks can carry, but they're very large missiles. The missile is about 39 feet long, so it's more than the length of two fairly long passenger cars, and the weight of it is pretty impressive. It's 24 tons. A missile weighing 24 tons. That's a whole lot of weight. I don't know how the thing manages to fly, but I guess if you have a nuclear power plant, you get the power to do anything. So it's quite an impressive missile, and they are able to carry one or more warheads, and they can fly for days and days at a low altitude, and they can drop their payload at unpredictable locations to defeat missile defenses. Now, I'm sure we will, as the video mentioned, we will try to come up with things to counter the Borovesnik missiles.
Yeah.
But we're not just dealing with those missiles. We're dealing with a whole array of different nuclear weapons. And one that has just come up is the Poseidon tsunami weapon.
Yeah.
And this just within the last week, President Putin announced a very successful test of the tsunami-producing nuclear weapon. And this is an interesting thing. It's one of Russia's 6 nuclear super weapons. And it was discussed years ago, but these things are finally coming into fruition, coming into final production.
Yeah, I think this is all very alarming. I would encourage everyone in their spare time to look at some of the lectures from Theodore Postal that talks about nuclear weapons. He has a very extensive knowledge on the Poseidon missile. This new cruise missile, I'm sure he will be speaking about this soon. But it's it's very alarming that it's a very serious matter when you speak about the capacity that these missiles have. He speaks about how if this missile was deployed in Pearl Harbor, it would completely knock out Hawaii, and that would be it.
Yeah,
Just how
was.
strong these missiles are. Some of his lectures talk about our capacity, our ICBM capacity in deterring an actual nuclear attack is insufficient with today's weapons that are coming out from Russia and China. And it's very alarming and should be taken seriously. I know when I had the pleasure of kind of being around him while he was giving this lecture, he spoke about how he had direct knowledge about seeing the president's black book on the nuclear war plans, and was disgusted by the fact that the people that were preparing the president to make such an extensive decision to take the lives of human beings, that it highly undercounted the number of casualties that would be included in dropping these weapons. As a nuclear physicist, he knew that the largest amount of deaths that would occur during the deployment of these weapons would be from the fireballs that come after. And he says that all the accounts of when, a president's black book would say, okay, drop it in this land, you'd lose this amount of people. It would highly deduct the number of people that he would suspect be murdered. And so I think that is very irresponsible, the people that are prepping the president to make these decisions. And I think that's important to note, that we have people that are taking these irresponsible actions to persuade the president to continue with escalation as opposed to diplomacy. So I just kind of wanted to have that tidbit in there, and encourage everyone to check out some of Postal's lectures on some of these weapons and in our capacity to deter some of these weapons.
Yes. It's important to recognize that, Morgan, I don't know whether you were aware of this, but under U.S. Nuclear doctrine, the President of the United States, whether it's Trump or Biden or Obama or Bush, they have unfettered authority to launch a nuclear strike for any reason or for no reason at all. If you have a president who just wakes up in the morning and he's angry at his wife, he can order a nuclear strike, and there are no checks and balances. We pride ourselves on a government that has checks and balances. Sometimes they work a little better than other times, but they're very real. There are no checks, there are no balances when it comes to the ultimate decision, which is to launch the destruction of the human race on Earth. And so you can imagine here, this new tsunami underwater drone, it goes at 115 miles an hour, which is kind of amazing for something traveling underwater at 115 miles an hour. And it's designed to evade all defenses and can cause a tsunami powerful enough to devastate a coastal city. Cities like New York City, Los Angeles, Houston, San Diego, Philadelphia, all are coastal cities that would be vulnerable now to the tsunami weapon. So you have missiles, intercontinental ballistic missiles coming in, raining down. Many of those will be stopped. Perhaps 90% of them would be stopped. But still, if you've got 10%, you've almost seen the destruction of the whole country. Mm-hmm. Then you have these others. You have the Boristovik that comes, and wherever there's something that survives, it knocks it out. You have these tsunami weapons that launch multiple tsunamis simultaneously on different coasts, and destroying all of the harbors, all of the shipping, and then after that you have the Russian nuclear submarine fleet, and they launch hundreds and hundreds, even under the best of calculations. A great portion of that fleet's going to survive, and they will launch many, many nuclear missiles. And there will be no major significant city left in the United States. Same thing can be said for Europe, because they're not just going after us, they're going after Europe.
Yeah. And I think kind of what initiated, some, looking over your notes and stuff, is some of the statements that Western leaders and some of our leaders have said. Maybe we can go into that. And I think that what is important to note is a Soviet era defense mechanism that is still in place today, called the dead hand, where a lot of our officials like to position, oh, if we just took out their nuclear sites, we could take over Russia. Well, they have this, like you said, the new cruise missiles can be in the air for as long as they run off of nuclear power. The same thing with the Poseidon missiles. Once they are released, they can actually remain dormant. But they have this dead hand mechanism where you have to have a person who is approving that they are still alive. Location pings, they approve they're still alive, and the weapon, it remains dormant. So if you have a instance where, like our officials claim, oh, if we just took out X, Y, and Z, place, we could actually win this nuclear war, which is absolutely absurd. You have this mechanism in place that these weapons will be released if there is no human checking in to let them know that they are still alive. And that is a Soviet era deterrence mechanism that is still in place today in Russia, which is alarming, but people don't really recognize that or understand that.
In Russia, the Russian nuclear doctrine said no first strike, that basically until somebody hits you, you don't hit them.
Yeah, it's very important to know. We're the only country that has the strike first policy.
Well, now they have altered it, and I couldn't tell you precisely where it is, but it ratchets it up a little bit to give the president of Russia greater authority, and it's not because they wanted it; it's because our nuclear doctrine is so extreme and so unbridled that if you have a president who doesn't have all his faculties, like you look at President Biden. President Biden was, not at all clear how much of the government he ran or how much he controlled. And, the same people who used the auto pen and signed his signature on all sorts of things, like taking every federal prisoner off of death row and commuting their sentence down from death to life imprisonment, every single one. We don't even know who did that, but it could have been anyone within the White House. Well, we're talking about the same thing with the nuclear weapon.
Yeah.
You don't have to say, well, okay, before you do it, you have to get the approval of Secretary of Defense, or you have to get the Secretary of State, or you have to get the Senate Majority Leader and the Speaker of the House, or something like that. Have to have a conversation among these people, and everybody says yes, it's a go. Let's go ahead and do it. You don't have to do that. The president just says, you know what, this is it. I've had it. We're gonna launch. And so the problem is every action has a reaction on the other side. And when we have a very aggressive first use policy, then it forces the others to start getting a more aggressive policy to match it. So, and you alluded to the statements teasing at the possibility of using nuclear weapons, and probably the most notable one early on even before the big fight between Russia and Ukraine broke out, you had Senator Weicker, who at the time was the ranking Republican, and he said that we need to be prepared to take military action against Russia if it went into Ukraine, and that we should not take a nuclear strike off the table. Well, that was a stunning type of pronouncement to make, because we had been very careful not to get that kind of thinking going in the minds of people in the West or people in Russia either. We don't want people to be conceiving of something like that. But it started, and then it's gone on. We had the NATO Secretary Ruda saying, well, we need to increase the level of nuclear readiness, and basically a little bit of nuclear saber rattling. So our nuclear cooperation is at a historic low.
Mm-hmm.
We've just abrogated all of these great, really vital nuclear treaties, and we're putting the $1 trillion over the next decade into modernizing our nuclear weapons. We're getting 12 new Columbia-class nuclear submarines, and now President Trump said just this October that the U.S. would resume nuclear weapons testing. Now, we've done testing, but we've done it all by computer for probably the last 30 years. And now the idea is to do open air testing of nuclear weapons once again. So it's and part of the reason that we talk about this today is that we're reaching a tipping point in the Ukraine war to where Ukraine looks to be on the verge of losing the war and potentially having a sort of a collapse along the battlefield in many places. And as we get close to that, then you have people who have committed their reputations and sometimes their wealth and their livelihood to winning this war.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a great temptation for them to say, well, let's just up the game. And so this is just a good reminder at this point to remember that a first strike nuclear attack from the United States against Russia would result in a response from Russia. Even if Russia was totally destroyed, they are going to launch their full panoply of nuclear weapons, and we're going to see the destruction of the United States of America.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What we kind of mentioned that I think is very important to extend upon is some of the treaties that are being chipped away at. The New START treaty actually expires this February in 2026. So I think one thing that we can all do and not, fester in doom and gloom is to inject into the populace the conversation of extending treaties, not allowing treaties to expire, and pushing the Trump administration to engage in more talks to roll back these nuclear weapons as opposed to escalate them. I think we had talked about this behind the stage was the speech that Trump had at Davos. where you could hear a pin drop in the room when he spoke about denuclearization that he had with Putin and Xi Jinping. Trump had just met with Xi Jinping the other day, and then I guess that kind of conversation was brought up again. So I know that we have extended past our time, but I definitely wanted to make a mention of the New START treaty, that expiring, and that we shouldn't allow that to expire, and that should be something that we aspire to instead of, allowing the fear of nuclear war kind of take over us and push us into kind of a nihilistic view of things, that we inject some of those ideas into the atmosphere, and hopefully they can take a life of their own and actually be extended. And that's kind of where I would like to leave things. If you would like to have a closing remark, Senator.
No, I think that's a very good final position. We need to do what we can to sort of back away from the use of nuclear weapons. And I think a good first start will be to wind up the Ukraine war, stop it before there's any more of this unbelievable slaughter that's taking place, and get back to productive things. War is destructive. It's not productive. We need to get back to things that will benefit America first, and every country's government and people first.
I agree, Senator, and I would like to encourage everyone who is listening. I extend my greatest gratitude for you tuning in and listening to our remarks, and I would encourage you to tune in next week to focus on the news. Thank you, Senator. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.